bar feel pain. Yeah, sure they did. Is everybody in the bar a little man? Yeah, both me and you. We traded in the family farm for snake oil. We bought into the carpetbagger's life. Now we're hanging on this cross, these feelings I've lost. Just watching the Liberty boat sail by. Can't help them build a barn at Raytheon, but they'll sell it on Kalamazoo. Some crazy motherfucker bound to drop it on a busload of kids going to school. You can't throw up your hands in denial. Justify the choices in your head. Just doing your job, just an innocent cop. But those little Yemeni kids will still be dead.
That's a few stanzas from the bar. And on that night that was unveiled in the East Village on Astor Place or down the street at the Theater 80 St. Mark's, who was there that night and spoke so eloquently, is our next guest, a presidential candidate, and maybe he can answer some of the questions that seem to be so baffling that we've been talking about today. Dr. Cornel West, thank you so much. We've been running overtime, but we're bringing you in right now. I know you're on the West Coast and you're a very busy man, but you remember that night at the bar.
Oh, do I remember that night? I remember your magnificent performance, though, brother. I'm telling you, it echoes George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory, Moms Mabley. We can go
but not Aristophanes.
Well, Aristophanes writing on the page. You were performing it with your body and your words. That's right. A big, big difference. But no, it's always a blessing to see you, my brother. We could be in the jail cell together with Carl Dix and Jim Frettos, or we can be in Jim Frettos' living room.
Yes, that was some night the other night.
Just the other night. That was beautiful to have you there with Jim and Beattie and Sam Cruz. We had a wonderful. Brother Gary Dorian was there. We had a time.
We had a great time. You know, I've got. You know, we've been talking here. I have the bar's author, composer Roger Waters is on the other line, and is
you got the one and only Roger Waters himself, man.
Yes, and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who you know. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is. We've been talking about the situation in Gaza for the last 15 minutes, and it's been. I know this is something that you've been so involved in, emotional about, and that's the last time I saw you was in D.C. when I had the Assange truck, and you were out there. You walked like 50 miles for peace, I suppose it was a ceasefire, that march to Lafayette Park.
Yeah, that was with the black ministers at that time. Most of them not had gone off to the war criminal Harris, though, but they shifted on me real quick. But I'm praying for them. Sooner or later, they're going to have to wake up and tell the truth about this barbaric criminality, this barbaric crime of genocide against our precious Palestinian babies and men and women and siblings and innocent folk, man. we don't have a language for it, though, brother. You know what I mean? Every day, every day, every day.
It's just unrelenting.
It's unbelievable, man. The gravitas of barbaric genocide before your very eyes is just beyond any kind of conceivability. But it's as real as a heart attack, you know. Good God.
Roger Waters, you were there that night with Cornel, and I'm going to try to find that little speech by you, Cornel. But I know I think I've seen you endorse Cornel for president. I can't do it at this station. I'm not allowed to. But you support Cornel's policies, at least.
I do. Yeah. There's to be honest, completely honest with you and Cornel and everybody else. There's Jill Stein, obviously. There's Dr. West, obviously. And there's another guy nobody's heard of called Joe Kishore, who represents the, World Socialist movement as well. My whole thing is that I get into arguments with people occasionally, and they're very, very short conversations, who tell me that you're dividing the vote, and if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, you may let the ultra evil Donald Trump into the White House. Nobody can possibly vote for either of the complicit in genocide candidates. You are abrogating your responsibility as a human being if you vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. It is absolutely against everything human to vote for either of them. You have got other candidates, including the three, in which obviously Dr. West is one of them, who you can vote for from a pure heart. Because if you have love and truth in your heart for your fellow human beings, you must use your vote to vote for somebody who does too. Kamala Harris doesn't, Donald Trump doesn't. You cannot vote for either of them.
Right.
Obviously, the whole system needs dismantling because, as we were saying before Dr. West came on, it is so corrupt. It's so much a corrupt plutocracy. Everything is for sale. We were talking about, the Israeli lobby. I'm going to stop talking because we have Dr. West here.
We have Dr. West.
He's telling the truth. Well, he was playing the truth on the piano that night. He's telling the truth right now, and he's been living the truth for the last umpteen decades and still strong as ever. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing.
You likened it to the bar that I think you said the greatest play ever written was by Eugene O'Neill, The Iceman Cometh. And tell us why that is germane today, and how these politicians out there are hoodwinking the public with their garbage, the same way that who's the anti-hero in The Iceman Cometh?
It's Hickman.
Hicks.
Hickman, yeah.
Hickey, yes.
Yeah, it's Hickey, absolutely. Well, I had made that allusion because after your wonderful performance, Sister Katie's wonderful performance, and then Brother Roger sitting at that piano all alone and singing from the depths of his heart, playing those beautiful notes, around the corner was Harry Hope's Saloon, which is the actual place where the great Eugene O'Neill had stayed. He'd tried to commit suicide just a few weeks after. And he went back in 1939 in his mind to write the greatest indictment of the American empire. And I wouldn't say it's the greatest play across, you know what I mean? Because you got King Lear, you got Three Sisters by Chekhov. There's some greater plays, but it's the greatest American literary indictment of the American empire. And it's basically this acknowledgement that here you get Hickey, who's a seller of dreams, very American, in the seller of dreams, but his innocence hides the violence. Everything is for sale. Everybody is for sale. And he says over and over again that if human beings have to make the choice between greed and liberty, they'll choose greed every time, and that Americans have chosen organized greed over liberty. It's about money. It's about the goal. It's not about integrity. It's not about service to working and poor people. Now, O'Neill himself was an anarchist, but he was an anarchist who believed that America had absolutely no potential for any fundamental social change, that it would be run by organized greed, it'd be run by a ruling class elite tied to short-term profit, and they would do anything to stay in power. It was a gangster-like system, and that's what Eugene O'Neill actually concluded as a literary artist again, as a literary artist, not as an activist, because very different than Brother Waters. Brother Waters is a freedom fighter who tells the truth. He knows how dim and grim it is, but he fights. He tells the truth through music. He tells the truth through activism. He tells the truth through solidarity, work. Eugene O'Neill was telling some deep truths, but he gave up. He just said, look, we don't have a chance. I mean, America has no potential whatsoever. That's why it is something that Eugene O'Neill said America was the greatest tragedy because it had the highest possibility. It lost it. It enacted the biblical claim about what happens when a nation conquers the world and loses its soul, and it's over. That was in 1939. And, of course, he's sitting there in the Tower House on the West Coast overlooking the bay and reading about the gangster Hitler who's sending his troops into Poland, and he's saying the West itself is about to implode. And he's dead by 1950. I think he died about 53 or so. So that for us to be right around that corner of that great literary text and yet build on the insights, but we refuse the conclusions. We still fight. Now, you could argue he was still fighting by writing the play, but we still fight beyond words. We still try to organize. We still try to mobilize. We still try to engage in building institutions and infrastructures, and we have some fun in the meantime. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have some fun in the meantime.
I'm going to ask you, Colonel Wilkerson, to jump in. The election's around the corner. You do have the two main candidates. Neither one of them are offering a solution that I can see. So a third-party candidate, I don't know if you're going that way, but what would you ask Dr. West at this point in time, and how possibly he could resolve the problems that we face, particularly the nuclear problem?
Well, I was listening to the literary allusions, and I was thinking about what I consider to be the most sublime poem in the English language, written by a poet who gets very little acclaim, but he was a terrific poet when he put pen to paper. He was also a schools inspector in England. His name was Matthew Arnold. The poem is Dover Beach. And the last lines of that poem are, "There is neither hope, nor certitude, nor relief from pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night." That's our world. That's our world today, just as surely as he thought it was his world when Aldous Huxley was saying religion is dead, God is dead, and John Henry Cardinal Newman was saying, no, he's not. The Catholic God is still alive, and they were having these tremendous battles over religion and science. Now we're having tremendous battles over whether we're going to continue to exist or not. And I think the verdict is coming down pretty hard and pretty fast that whatever there is in the world, divine providence, whatever you want to call it, I happen to be an atheist myself, but whatever there is in the world is sick and tired of man. And we're going to be gone very shortly, either in a mushroom cloud or a series of mushroom clouds, more likely, or the climate's going to eat our lunch because we're too stupid. We're the only civilization in human history to have created the technological means to destroy ourselves, and we have the technological means to save ourselves in both categories, nuclear weapons and climate change. But we're not going to do it in either. So I say be damned with us.
Dr. West, your response to that?
Well, I just love my brother's tremendous energy and spirit behind his very dim conclusion. Brother Colonel, I mean, as I recall, too, in Norman Mailer's great book on Miami, he invokes that poem by Matthew Arnold as well, because that poem is something that speaks to a number of different ages, not just, as Brother Mann was saying, it's not just 19th century, but it speaks in some ways for the history of the species, from Sophocles to Shakespeare all the way up to Thomas Pynchon and Toni Morrison. The story over and over again is, how do we break the human addiction to self-destruction? And how do you, when you break that, how long do you break it, and why is it that we continually go back to self-destruction? And that includes gratuitous violence, you get in Dostoevsky. That includes just raw hatred that you get in the Theodore Dreiser. All the different things that go into ways in which human beings seem to be thoroughly addicted to self-destruction. And we've had these wonderful moments of interruption and disruption. And we're right now the dominant tendencies in the world, not just fascist in terms of government and social arrangement, but it is self-destruction in terms of ecological catastrophe and ecological crisis. And the fossil fuel industry would rather opt for short-term profits rather than would want to opt for short-term profits rather than allow the planet to go on. I mean, that's the level of human wretchedness that we're talking about. But the very spirit behind my dear brother Colonel's words, the compassion, the courage, the willingness to tell the truth, that's also, I think, at work in what Arnold was talking about. And that's at work in what all of us are about. We are going to go down swinging, just like a jazz man or a jazz woman. We going down swinging no matter what the catastrophes actually are. And what the conclusions are, it's hard to say. Hard to say. C.S. Eliot says, art is in the trying, the rest is not our business. We don't have full control over it, whether you're atheist or theist or anything else. We can only do what we can do, bear witness, be a witness, make sure that truth and justice and love has some place in our lives, and we hope connected to others by means of organizing.
Wow. I'm not following that. Roger, why don't you jump in? Whoa.
I was half listening to Dr. West, and he triggered something in me, which is I wrote a musical play called Lay Down Jerusalem, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago now, and it keeps popping back to me. One of the songs in it is To Kill the Child. And it's just a song about murdering children and why we would want to do that. And the play is actually about an old man in Northern Ireland who is babysitting his grandson one night. And there's a monologue at the beginning. I won't bore you with it. I'd be telling you the whole play. But his child is having a nightmare, the grandson. And the grandfather asks him what's wrong. And he says, they're killing the children, Grandpa. And the grandfather says, no, that was 30 years ago in the Troubles. They're not killing the children anymore. And the kid says, not here, Grandpa, over there. And so the grandfather thinks about that, and he thinks he's right. So in the morning, he goes and wakes him up and says, come on. And he takes him on a sort of magic carpet ride all over the world to try and find an answer to the child's question, which is, why are we killing the children, or why are they killing the children? And they go everywhere, and they see and they look down on battles and blah, blah, blah. And eventually they get back to almost the point where they started, and funnily enough, they end up in Central Park in New York, and they're listening to a band who are playing one of my songs. What a surprise. And they are approached by a taxi driver who was in the play earlier on. And the taxi driver comes up to them and he says, they are killing the children for empty, echoing, magnificent homes. And the reason he says that, because at the end of my song, there's a line that goes, the champion sits on his golden throne in his empty, echoing, magnificent home, looking out over the field of bones, but the last one standing stands alone. That's the end of the play. But it's not quite, because the grandfather says, we can't leave them with that. And they sing there's one more song. And then the grandfather turns to the child, who has shown an enormous amount of empathy for his fellow human beings through the whole magic carpet ride. And he says something like, child, your attachment to the predicament of others does you great credit. your father would be proud of you. Well, I'm in tears speaking that line to you because it is central to every breath that I take that my father was killed by the fucking Nazis.
Oh, you can't use that.
February the 18th, 1944. And I've never got over it, and I never will. And I know this because I've been deeply into the trauma. And, you know, I could talk to Gabor Mate about it for about 5 weeks without pausing. Not that I know Gabor, I don't. I know the son. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is maybe there's truth in what the taxi driver says. Maybe it is. It's just an example of the attachment to the idea that gold is important. Well, we know King Midas learned about that. And we should all be able to learn the lesson that empty, echoing, magnificent homes don't mean shit.
You can't use that word.
Private jets. Sorry.
You can't use that language here. All right.
Have you all seen the video?
Don't go anywhere. Go ahead, Colonel.
I'm just going to say, have you seen the video? I think the Turks made it. I can't watch it without filling up with tears.
Yeah.
It's a very short video, and it says it's 26 years in the future or something like that. And
16.
They're going around to the different cities, New York and Houston, and they go overseas. And they're looking at the different, quote, Holocaust museums, unquote. And they're all Palestinians. And you're seeing much of what you see in the Holocaust Museum here in Washington. You're seeing the display of shoes, little children's shoes and so forth. But in every vignette, they come fast and furious. Korea, France, and so forth. In every vignette, the child is sitting on his grandfather's or his father's knee watching it. And he turns his eyes to his father or grandfather and he says, "What did you do? Why did you let this happen? What did you do? Why did it happen? What did you do?" And the look on the adults' faces is priceless.
Wow. Well, we're going to go to you, Cornel, and you can respond to Roger's story and Colonel's.
Well, I mean, both of my brothers are just what Melville called deep sea divers when it comes to dealing with who we are as human beings and our history and time and space. And we know how wretched we are. We know how greedy and hateful human beings can be. And yet at the same time, you know, I'm with both Sophocles and with Hebrew Scripture and New Testament in terms of the wretchedness goes hand in hand with a sense of possibility and a sense of potentiality that has to do with tears that are shed. It has to do with fire in souls. It has to do with love flowing from hearts. It has to do with justice and the centrality of memory that Brother Waters talked about, that memory. You remember Marcuse begins the early moments of Eros and civilization. He says, all utopian thought and energy is rooted in a plenitude of memory, remembering when something happened, either a good time or a bad time, a moment of death, of loss, of betrayal, but also a sense that we will have a resilience and a resistance against that memory. I think of Brother Rogers' memory of his precious father and the ways in which it's generated magnificent artistry, magnificent moral energy, magnificent courageous political activism in it, opposing every genocide, opposing every act of Nazism, no matter who they are, no matter what color they are, no matter what nation they are. Well, you see, that's part of the oscillation between our undeniable wretchedness and our undeniable sense of possibility and wonderfulness. And I just want to keep track of both. You know, I think that we can't be naive about the wretchedness, and it can lead towards self-destruction. It can lead towards the non-existence of the planet and the wonderfulness, all of that love, all of that vitality, vibrancy, unbelievable buoyancy, and energy that has to do with trying to be forces of good in the language of John Coltrane.
Wow. Joe, Lauria, it's been a while. We only have a few minutes, and there are a few questions I want to ask Cornel about his campaign. If you have anything, Joe, you may want to throw in about his campaign.
Just to say that this very conversation shows how important a free media, free radio, free press is, because without that, people can't get the information they need to think for themselves, to reject Israel smearing anyone who criticizes what they're doing, horrified by it, as belonging to Hamas. And this is what as I mentioned before, the Terrorism Act in Britain and what could happen in the U.S. to criminalize journalism. If you criticize Israel, you're being smeared as belonging to Hamas, a proscribed organization. Even the Secretary General of the UN has been called Hamas by the Israeli ambassador, and he's a persona non grata. I mean, they're out of their minds in Israel right now. And what's really shocking to me is not so much that, but that the Western governments and media are tolerating it and furthering it and accepting it. This is what's got to stop, because that's the power we have in Western countries, not to believe this rubbish that the Israelis are saying and to tell what's going on. But that's what shocks me even more than the Israeli behavior, that we here in the West are not standing up to it, particularly in the establishment. And this is why, again, we need a free press to push back against that.
Cornel, you've been on the station many times. Are you having a hard time getting on mainstream media? Because you used to always get on CNN and other stations.
Oh, yeah, during the campaign, of course, it's a whole different situation because this corporate media is so tied to the corrupt corporate duopoly. I mean, my God. And they become propaganda machines for both parties, you know. So that it has been much more difficult. But to speak to Joe's question about the criminalizing of journalistic voices, I think in the United States it also has to do with a culture of cowardliness. You are rewarded for being a coward by being indifferent and silent about barbaric genocide, and so there's a certain kind of implicit censorship that becomes explicit when you raise your voice. And so when you think the legacies of I.F. Stone and Seymour Hersh and Glenn Ford and Ida B. Wells and W.B. Du Bois, these are folk who were willing to take a tremendous risk. And I think of Brother Waters, trying to have his concerts taking place in certain Latin American countries, and they won't let him in. Well, you see, that's echoes of Nina Simone and Gil Scott-Heron and Curtis Mayfield and the artists who are willing to pay tremendous risk in order to keep telling the truth. That's courage. But cowardliness, not just conformity and complacency, but outgoing cowardliness is becoming hegemonic in so many of our establishmentarian spaces in the American Empire and other places. And that's another sign of what Brother Colonel is talking about. That's exactly how self-destruction of nations and so forth take place, where the cowards become simply parts of a mob that follows a Pied Piper that is not just fascist, but more and more himself a coward and trying to come to terms with his own inadequacies as he projects being so brave.
Wow. Wow. Listen, I'm going to give everyone, I got 6 minutes left. I need just some closing remarks, and you'll close it yourself, Cornel. But let me go with Roger, Joe. Joe just spoke, Colonel Wilkerson, and then you, Cornel. But you go Roger, Colonel, Joe for a minute, and then you. But you all got like a minute here, a minute and a half.
All right. Something that helps me, guys, is a litmus test, which I use all the time. And that is that after the Second World War, on December the 10th, 1948, something else happened. After the Nakba in May, December the 10th, the United Nations got together and enshrined the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in international law. It exists. That is a litmus test that I can hold up anywhere. If I hold my litmus test up to Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, they do not pass the test. They do not believe in universal human rights. Everything they ever do or say lets you know that. If you hold it up to Cornel West, to Dr. West, my friend, he passes the litmus test. He does believe in in universal human rights for all our brothers and sisters all over the world, irrespective of their ethnicity or religion or nationality. So good for you, Brother West.
All right, Colonel Wilkerson?
Yeah, I'll be very optimistic. When I take my granddaughter, 24-year-old granddaughter, to see Fidelio at the Kennedy Center, wonderful opera, tomorrow night, and when I, 2 or 3 days later, take my 17-year-old grandson to fly fish in a beautiful river and catch beautiful fish, and revel in both of those occasions and revel in the love and the joy that's accompanying them, I don't have so much problem anymore. And I recommend that to everyone.
And them.
Yes. No, I tell you that when I think of my dear brother Waters and what his life has been, you know, Shakespeare said, in the end, we're trying to be flickering candles against the backdrop of black barbarism. You see that in Hamlet, it's in King Lear, it's in Macbeth and Othello. But then there's the Rosalinds and others who provide a light. And that light has everything to do with Beethoven's only opera, Fidelio, or the Ninth Symphony. It could be Opus 131, the greatest string quartet ever written. Or it could be, we don't wait no education. All these different artistic expressions of the flickering candles against the backdrop of dark barbarism. And I just want to end on a note of love. I love each and every one of you all for who you are, what you do, what you have done, what you continue to do, of solidarity, of people catching hell, be it in Gaza, be it in Sudan, Ireland, Congo, Guatemala, south side of Chicago, Muslims in China, whatever. And at the same time, want to be able to preserve our own personal sense of integrity and honesty and decency, so when the worms get our bodies, people will have to say, they tried to keep their candle flickering, but they were aware of the dimness of the barbarism at work in their times.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. We're going to have to go now, but we're going to go out. You mentioned Fidelio being the only opera, 1814 by Beethoven, and Ode to Joy, which is written by Schiller. That's the libretto in Ode to Joy in the Ninth Symphony, and we're going to go out with that. Thank you, Brother West. Thank you, Brother Waters.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Wilkerson. And we're going to go out. Listen to this. All right, this is for you. This is, I think, the great Paul Robeson. Thank you all. Thank you, Joe. Here we go. Take a look.
Praise to Joy, the God descended, daughter of Elysium, ray of mirth and rapture blended, goddess, to thy shrine we come. By thy magic is united, what stern custom parted wide. All mankind are brothers plighted, where thy gentle wings abide. Freude, schöne Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium, wir betreten feuertrunken, himmlische dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mutter streng geteilt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Fliegel war.